training video, tutorial video here for the signal blocker. So the most common use case for the signal blocker, well actually I mean specifically what the signal blocker was originally designed for was, quite often when new users to BloodHound, when they're building systems, they will quite often build something that kind of looks like this, where they get a long series, right, of long signals, and sometimes a long series of short signals. Here we go. Here's a good mixture, right? So yeah, you get these multiple signals in a row here. And, if you're trading discretionarily, this can be fine, unless, of course, it just personally bugs you. You just want to see one, nice clean signal there. But where this can be problematic is when you plug these signals into an auto trader. Like if you plug these signals into Raven or Blackbird, then this can be problematic. So for example here, let me, like these short signals here, right? Here, this is where it could be problematic having all these signals in a row here, right? So let's say, right, you have short signal. So Blackbird gets you into a short trade, here. Let's stretch this out a little bit, right? And then, let's say maybe your profit target is, down here, right? So you get into the trade about here, and then you get a profit target hit right on this long bar down, but then you still have short signals here. So now Blackbird's going to dump you into, or Raven's going to open up another short trade right here, right? But really your intention was you only wanted to get into a trade on the first bar, right? So that's kind of a primary example of where these continuous signals can lead to problems when you start auto trading. Again, it's not really a problem for discretionary traders here. So cleaning up these continuous signals here is kind of the primary purpose here of the signal blocker, right? So I already have kind of an example created here that I can work with. All right. So what I did is I just took a threshold solver. We can see here, right? This is a threshold solver, and I just plugged in the stochastics, so we can see whenever the stochastics is oversold, we get a short, and when the stochastics is overbought, right, we get a long output there. So we're using the 75 and 25 stochastic levels there, right? So I'm going to use the signal blocker to clean these signals up here. So let's go to the function nodes here, grab a signal blocker, connect that in. Oh, and yep. Actually, I'm kind of glad I did this. Yeah, so pay attention here. So I accidentally connected it into the reset here. So I want to make sure that goes into the input. There we go. There. And now let's plug that in. And here we can see, right, for the most part, it cleaned up the signals, except look here, we have two short signals here, right? So let's kind of take a step back here and let me, right, draw some rectangles here. All right, so we know how long these signals continued. There we go. Right. And let's connect up our signal blocker again. Right, so there we go. We got the first signal, and then the other signals were blocked. Right, so you can see it cleaned it up here. But right here, we got the first signal, and then we got another signal, right? And the reason why is that the signal blocker only blocks for a certain number of bars. So right now, right, the default is only blocking for 5 bars here, right? So on something like this, probably we should increase it to maybe 10 bars, like that, And there we go. So now it's all, now everything's blocked here. And if we shrink this up, there we go. Oh, look, even 10 bars was not enough. So look at this short here, right? So we can see we get a short signal as soon as the stochastic goes oversold, right? And it's blocking all those signals, but we add one more signal. So the stochastic stayed below 25 for longer than 10 bars here, right? Let's look at the input signals here. Yeah, so this was at least 11 bars there. So that tells me instead of 10, let's go to 15. And there we go. So now that cleaned up that last little short signal there. And actually, yeah, this section here also looked like, yeah, the stochastics might have been longer than 10 bars. So, and look, oh, here we go. So here's another example. Even 15 bars wasn't enough. So, all right, let's increase that to 20 there. Well, actually, let's just go 25. What the heck? So there we go. Right, so there's that. First and foremost, that's basically what the signal blocker is for, is to kind of clean things up. So sometimes it's pretty rare, but sometimes you might need to use this internally. So if you have, a much bigger system here, say with like 50 nodes, sometimes you might need to clean up some of the signals internally within a much larger complex system here. But that's pretty rare. Typically, you only need one signal blocker at the very end of the system. So, all right. So, for example, well, actually, yeah, I'll kind of circle back around to that last comment there. So right, so that's basically what the signal blocker does. So so the next important the next most commonly used element of the signal blocker are the resets, right? Because sometimes you don't want to block for 25 bars, just blindly, right? Sometimes you need the next signal to get through here. So we have a bunch of reset options here. And actually, yeah, so let me create an example of why we might need a reset here. So let's take these two short signals, for example. I'm sorry, long signals, for example here. And let me increase this and say 50 bars. Right? Say we're overzealous and we just plug in a high number there. Well, so we got this one, but this next long signal here no longer exists because the signal blocker is blocking, right? Blocking for 50 bars. We just wiped out one of the signals here. And yeah, let me also, I'm going to jump ahead and utilize this actively blocking here. So I like to put in 0.1 or 0.2 here. And what that does is we can see, right, this tiny little output here of 0.2, right? So this allows you to actively see when the signal blocker is blocking. So we can see where this long signal used to be, well, we can see now the signal blocker is still blocking, and it's blocking all the way down to this point here. So there's probably a bunch of situations where, yeah, here, look at here, the stochastic, right, breaks above 75, breaks above 75, breaks, right? So we're missing two other long signals here. And we can see here, right, the signal blocker is actively blocking all the way until it gets to this short signal. And we can see this short signal then disabled the long signal blocking, or that short signal reset the long signal blocking there. And the reason why is because of this input opposite signal, right? So at the input, an opposite signal came in, right? So we had a long signal, actively blocking, and of course a short signal is the opposite of a long signal. So this short signal is what reset the blocking of the long signals. And so then when this next long signal came in, we can see the signal blocker was no longer blocking long signals. So this long signal got through there. All right. So there's other resets here that we can use to allow these long signals back in here, right? So yeah, let me just kind of put a little arrow there. There. All right. So let's go into our reset list here. And the reset I'm talking about is input no signal, right? So what is a no signal here? Well, let's first look at our signals, right? These are our signals. So, right, when there's no signal, that's what a no signal is, right? So this area in here, there's no signal. So that's what we're talking about. So when we get these blank areas, we can use these blank areas to also reset the signal blocker, right? So let's connect this back up. And let's go into our resets there. And let's enable the input no signal here. And there we go. There's our long signals back. And again, this kind of further illustrates why I like to use the actively blocking here, especially when you're building a system here. Maybe once you've got your system all fully flushed out and built, then you no longer will need this actively blocking, right? But as you're building your system here, it is definitely very handy to use this actively blocking here. And when we look down here, all right, we can see the signal blocker is blocking, but then once we get into this area here where there's no signals, right, then the signal blocker is reset, right? So blocking, and then the signal blocker gets reset, right, once the stochastics left the oversold and there was no longer a signal anymore there, right? So there we go. Yeah, so let me kind of go through these resets here. So all these resets here are just combinations of the same conditions, combinations here, right? So if you notice the first word here, right, the first word of all of these is either input or reset. So the first word refers to the connection point. Are we talking about, right, a signal coming in to the input, or is a signal coming into the reset? All right. And then the next part is identifying the condition coming into that connection point, right? So let's see. Oh yeah, perfect. So this little 3 signal area here is actually kind of perfect here. Let me move this off to the side to demonstrate, what is input signal here. So let's select that, and I turned off the no signal here, and also I'm going to turn off the reset. So we have nothing going into the reset there, right? So, and yeah, so effectively the input signal here is kind of nullifying the signal blocker. In this example here, yeah, it's nullifying the signal blocker, really, we can see here. And so what this means is when a signal of the same direction comes in, that signal in the same direction is what's resetting the signal blocker there. Okay. I'm trying to think off the top of my head a practical reason why you'd ever use this, right? This is definitely a bad example here, right? Because enabling that, right, effectively is disabling the signal blocker, right? The signal blocker is no longer doing its job anymore when we enable this here. So yeah, if I can think of an example here off the top of my head, I'll circle back around to why you might use the input signal here. But yeah, as we can see, whenever the stochastic is oversold, right, if we connect this up here, there, right, so all of these signals coming in is what is constantly, right, resetting the signal blocker here, right? So signal, so just the word signal is referring to a signal in the same direction that's being blocked, right? So again, let me here, actually I'm going to increase this to 0.3 so we can see the actively blocking here a little bit more. Right? So what is actively being blocked are long signals. So the word signal in this situation is referring to long signals, because long signals are what's being blocked, right? And so for the short signals, right, signal would be referring to short signals, since the short signals are what's actively being blocked here, right? And then we do have opposite signals, right? So, I mean, hopefully these terminologies are, pretty self-explanatory there, right? So obviously, let's turn off that, and so let's focus on, so what does opposite signal mean? Well, right now, right, long signals are being blocked. So what's opposite of a long signal? Well, it's the short signals. So we can see here, right, the short signal is what reset the long signal blocking. So now the signal blocker is blocking short signals. So what does opposite signal mean now? Well, a long signal is opposite of the short signals which are being blocked. Right? So, yeah, and we can see here, again, every possible combination is included on this reset list here. So we even have, right, so, yeah, so let me kind of go back to the no signal, input no signal, right? So bingo, there we go. There's our 3 long signals again, right? Well, we even have the opposite of this no signal. So again, the word signal is referring to what is being blocked. So what's being blocked are longs, right? So when there's no longer a long signal coming in, right, it's the absence of long signals, which is what's resetting this here, right? So yeah, that's why I had this up here, right? And I didn't have it down here, right? I had it up here because it's referring to the absence of long signals. So, but if we look at this list, we also have input opposite no signal. So we could use the short signals, right? The absence of short signals to reset the signal blocker as well, right? So again, every possible combination here is available to you to use to reset the signal blocker, right? Because you never know, what conditions traders will come up with that they might need to turn the signal blocker off, right? And so this input opposite signal would be referring to, right? It would be referring to when there's no short signals, right? Actually, I should be drawing this down here in the BloodHound output, right? So that opposite no signal would be referring to an absence of short signals when long signals are being blocked. Right? So that's essentially it. You can use a signal of the same direction to reset. You can use when there's no signal, again, in the same direction that's being blocked, right? Or you can use an opposite signal, right? I think the most common ones here is going to be opposite signal and possibly no signal, right? And reset signal does get used a lot as well, right? But I think it's fair to say that in more complex systems, do you start using the reset connection there? So, but yeah, these three here are probably the most commonly used resets there. But everything's available to you. Let's go through this here, right? So again, signal. The word signal is referring to what is being blocked. Is it the long signals being blocked, or is it the short signals being blocked, right? Let me connect that back up there. Let's see here. All right, yes, we had signal, we had no signal. Then we have opposite signals, so that was already explained, right? Since when longs are being blocked, then a short signal has to come in, right? That's the opposite. So when shorts are being blocked, then a long signal has to come in, right? A long signal is opposite. And then you also have the opposite no signals as mentioned there. So, right? So those are the various kind of incoming signal or no signal conditions. And then the rest of it is, well, is that reset signal or no signal going into the input, or is it going into the reset, right? So we can see here we have a reset opposite no signal, right, along with an input opposite no signal, right? We have a input opposite signal and we have a reset, right? So the reset connection has all the same reset conditions as the input, right? So that's why there's so many different combinations, because we have two inputs there. So if you're building a far more complex system, right, sometimes you will need to use the reset connector to turn that signal blocker off, based on other charting kind of conditions there. And then it's just a matter of finding out, well, am I using a signal in the same direction, right, that's resetting it, right? So if you want to allow here, let me turn that off, right? So if you're using the reset connection, and you want to allow these other two long signals to come in, well, is your reset signal, is it in the same direction, right? Is it a long signal that's coming into the reset that you're using to turn off the signal blocker, right? Or are you using a signal in the opposite direction coming into the reset, right? So when using the reset connection, the reset signal and reset opposite signal, those are by far the two most common conditions that you'll be using for the reset there. Yeah. All right, I think that takes care of the resets. So let's dive into some of these other more complex settings here. All right. So the signal threshold. So with the creation of BloodHound version 2, the fuzzy logic foundation that BloodHound's built on is hardly discussed anymore, right? So, yeah, that was kind of one of the main reasons for creating BloodHound version 2 is we found out that, traders don't really want to build complex fuzzy logic systems, right? So, so the solvers nowadays are defaulted to remove that fuzzy logic calculation there. But again, BloodHound is still built on top of fuzzy logic calculations here. So that's why we still have this signal threshold. So what is this referring to, right? Well, it is referring to, and I'm going to stretch this open here, right? It's referring to these two lines here, right? So if we open up the indicator window here, and right, so we have BloodHound selected here, and right, we have this let's see, there we go, under lines. So under lines, right, we have a long threshold and a short threshold. All right, and you can see they're set to 0.8. So this means 80%, right? So in order to get a racing stripe, or or another way, a racing stripe, you could also call that an actionable trade signal, right? So in order to get a racing stripe, you need an output here, right? The BloodHound's output has to exceed 80% of, right, 80% of that fuzzy logic calculation, right? So I'm not going to get into fuzzy logic here, but but I just want to explain that that is what this signal threshold is referring to. So the output needs to exceed 80% before the signal blocker considers it a signal that needs to be blocked, right? So if you were building a fuzzy logic system here, then the signal blocker is not always going to block everything coming into it, right? Whatever is being fed into the signal blocker, right, the output value here needs to be greater than this 80% before the signal blocker will start blocking there. So again, for 99.9% of traders out there, you guys just ignore this. Just leave it alone. This is really only for those developing fuzzy logic systems there. So, all right, the next setting here, actually I'm going to jump down to block opposite signals here. So actually this kind of falls more in line with what we were just talking about here. So if I enable the block opposite signals, we can see here, so when actually hold on, let me There, let me put this back to the appropriate resets here. There we go. Oh, actually that doesn't work either. Okay, well, I'm just gonna have to turn this all the way off. There. Yeah, in order to help this work with me. There, and I'm gonna knock this down to 15. There. All right, so we can see, right, a long signal came in here, right? A long signal came in from the stochastic, and right, the long signal goes through, and then we can see now both long signals and short signals are being blocked as well. And actually, look back here is a good example. So, right, we know we have a long signal there, and we would expect to see a short signal right there. Right, let me make sure I got this on the right bar. Yeah, right there. Right, because the stochastics went oversold. So if we look at our signals, right, yeah, there we go, right? So stochastics oversold, so we know we have some shorts. But from the signal blocker, with this block opposite signals, right, we can see that longs and shorts are both being blocked together here. So we didn't actually get this signal, this short signal here, because it's being blocked. And then we do get this short signal here because our 15, our count of 15 bars, ended. So the signal blocking came to an end, and the stochastics was still oversold. So that short signal did get through eventually, and now that short signal is now blocking both long and short signals together there, right? So yeah, sometimes you might be building a system where a long signal comes in, and then you want to block all signals, short and long, for a certain period of time. And I think it's appropriate to say that if you're using the block opposite signals, I think the vast majority of the time you will also be using the reset connection as well, right? So blocking opposite signals is typically something for more complex systems there. And those more complex systems are usually using the reset connection as well, right? So, right, that's pretty straightforward there, right? Just block both signals at the same time there. Now, if I turn on the input no signal there, right, so we can see that when the long comes in, and actually, hold on, let me knock this back up to 50 there. There. Right. So when that long comes in, right, the long signals are being blocked until there's an absence of long signals, right? So, right, no more long signals. So it reset the long blocking. So why aren't the shorts being blocked anymore? Right? I still have block opposite signals, but the shorts are not being blocked. Well, that's because I think you guys know where I'm going with this, right? There's no short signals coming in, right? So the stochastics is no longer oversold. And again, our reset is no signals, right? So the no signal. So when resetting the signal blocker, again, the no signal is referring to whatever is being blocked. So if we're trying to block the opposite signals, well, if there is no opposite signal, then right, that condition is true, right? There's no signal on the short side. So the short blocking instantly got reset because there are no signals on the short side there, right? So that's kind of why, when I turn this on, I was looking here and I kind of paused, realizing, oh, wait a minute, I was hoping to see some short blocking, but yeah, there is no short signals coming in here. So there you go. No signal. Remove the short blocking there. All right, yeah, so block opposite signals is, again, pretty straightforward. And as we can see here in this example, right, you have to be extra mindful of how your resets are being utilized, right? So, yeah. Okay, so now to the last setting here, this intra-bar signal mode here. Yeah, so going back a couple of years, we updated or upgraded the signal blocker to work with intra-bar signals here. So what is intra-bar signals? Yeah, it's just it's a more direct way of saying. So again, I'm going back to the indicator list here. So it's a more direct way of calling out the calculate mode, right? So if your calculate is set to on bar close, then there are no intra-bar signals, right? You got to wait for the bar to close. However, if you do need to use calculate on each tick or calculate on price change, right? Both of these calculation modes, they're specifically designed to generate signals intra-bar, right, as the bar is forming there, right? So that signal blocker setting only functions when your calculate is set to on each tick or on price change, right? So let's cancel that here. Yeah. So there you go. And when you start generating signals intra-bar, right, or when you start using the calculate on price change or calculate on each tick, right, a whole bunch of different variations of how you might need to use the signal blocker, become exposed. It's kind of like if you've ever used the NinjaTrader's strategy analyzer optimizer, right? Every time you add a new variable to optimize, the number of iterations grows exponentially. So it's kind of like the same thing here with the signal blocker, right? We introduced, another calculation mode, that the signal blocker work with, and so now we have 3 other possibilities that you might need when using, intra-bar signals there, right? So the first one, lock and hold, right? So we believe this is probably going to be the default one that most people are going to use here, right? So lock and hold means when the first signal comes in, right, as the bar is forming, when that first signal comes in, lock onto that signal and hold that signal, and then the signal blocker actively blocks, right? So this actually kind of, it does 2 functions. So when that signal comes in intra-bar, and let's see where we're at here. All right. Yeah, our stochastics is oversold here. But let's go back. And wow, man, the markets are really calm today. That's really surprising. All right, let me try and, here. I think this is probably a good example. So you see this bar here, right? It has a really long wick. So it's possible that as this bar was building, that the stochastics could have gone up into the overbought level, right? So this bar could have actually generated a buy signal on it when price got way up here to the top, right? That could have pushed our stochastics above 75 and generated a temporary long signal, right? So that's kind of what this lock and hold is for, is, right, as price goes up and down, you'll have trade signals coming and going, right? Trade signals will appear and disappear, reappear and disappear as price bounces up and down. So this lock and hold will lock onto that signal and hold it. Yeah. So actually, this is a good example where you might actually see a signal. So as you're letting your system run on live data, you might actually have seen, you might have gotten a long signal here, but then when the bar closed, you can see the stochastic down here, and you might be wondering, well, why was there a long signal here? Because the stochastics didn't get above 75. Well, that's because intra-bar, right, this long wick could have pushed the stochastics up to generate a long signal, right? But then price came back down, obviously, right? Yeah. So, yeah, so those are some of the things you have to be aware of when you're working with the calculate mode set to like on price change or on each tick. Is you have to think about bars with these long wicks. They definitely will generate signals, at the end of those wicks, but then price pulls back, and you're looking at your indicators historically based on the closing price. You're not looking at your indicators based on where they were when those wicks were being formed, right? So, yeah. So, again, that's what lock and hold will do. Is it would have locked onto a long signal here as the stochastics got pushed up there. Right. Next one. So, let's see here. Allow first signal. So this, as the name implies, it allows the first signal to go through, but it doesn't hold onto it, right? It doesn't lock that signal in place. So I'm going to use this bar again as a great example here, right? So as price went all the way up to the high, right? A long signal would have been generated. And that long signal would have gone. You would have seen that long signal temporarily, right? As long as price was up here, but when price pulled back, the signal blocker is not going to hold on to that signal anymore. It just allows that first signal to go through, and then it starts blocking. Right, the one thing we don't know is how many times did price push up, right? Did it go all the way up? Did it pull back a few ticks, right? Pulls back a few ticks, and then our stochastics goes below 75, so the signal disappears, and then, right, and then price might have pushed back up again, and right, so another signal could have occurred, but with the signal blocker set to allow the first signal, only that first signal gets through, and then the rest are blocked. And you will see, right, so if that occurs, you will see the actively blocking here, right? So there we go. So there's my little temporary active blocking there, right? Yeah, so as price pushed up, generated a signal, right? The allow first signal allows that signal to go through, to Raven or Blackbird there, and then you would see inactively blocking if you have your active blocking turned on, of course. So all right. So these two are essentially the same. It allows the first signal through, right, which is the main purpose of the signal blockers, right? Allow your first signal through and then block the rest. But one will actually hold on to that signal, so it stays there historically, right? The other one just allows that signal to go away if price pulls back. So, and then this one, hopefully this name is pretty self-explanatory as well, which is only block after the bar closes, right? So maybe, as price is bouncing up and down here, right, maybe you want all of those intrabar signals to show up, right, as price bounces up and down. And then you only want the signals to be blocked after the bar closes. Now, after bar closes opens up other possibilities here. And let's see. Yeah, since I have not used the signal blocker in this mode here. Okay, yeah. So this block signals if. So there's two possibilities here. So if you're blocking signals after the bar closes, well, then you have two possibilities here, right? Do you want to block? Yeah, let me open this up a little bit more. There. So do you want to block if price pulls back, right? So obviously when price pulled back, there's no longer a signal. So do you still want to block even though price pulled back and when the bar closed there was no signal, right? The stochastics is down here, so there is no signal when the bar closed. So do you want to block signals only if there is a signal at the time the bar closes, or do you want to block anytime, right? So in other words, so if they're, so in this case here, a signal occurred intra-bar, right, as this bar was forming, and so with the signal occurs any time, this will start, this will block in this exact situation here, right? So a signal occurred way up here, but then price pulled back and there was no active signal when the bar closed. So this setting will block this will block long signals afterwards, right? If we use signal at bar close, well, the signal blocker will not be blocking because because this bar closed down and there was no active signal when that bar closed, right? So this would not be blocking any signals after the bar closes because there is no active signal, right? So this one, signal at bar close, as the name implies, there must be a signal when the bar closes. If you want to block when a signal occurs intrabar and you don't care that the bar closed with an active signal, then this is the setting you want to use here. All right, and that covers the signal blocker.